So maybe you're considering getting a fat bike but aren't quite sure if it's for you. In this video, I'm going to share with you 4 things I've learned about fat bikes and fat biking, and hopefully it will help you make that decision. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're interested in things like bike touring, bike packing, gravel riding, and bike fishing, then consider subscribing. You have found your people. This is the first time we've lived in a place with actual winter and actual snow that's actually falling all the time. And it's also the first season I've had a fat bike for any extended period of time. And during this period, I've learned that I've actually had quite a few misconceptions about what having a fat bike is like. In this video, I'm going to share with you guys 4 misconceptions or observations I've had in this first season of fat biking. So misconception number 1, I think one of the biggest ones is that by having a fat bike, you will just naturally float over everything. And nothing could be further from the truth. While yes, the bigger tires do offer more flotation than a standard mountain bike tire, there are just some times when the snow is too wet or too soft or too new or too powdery that no matter how low you run the tire pressure, you're just going to sink through the snow. It's just physics. Depending on where you are, what kind of snow you have, there's just not enough surface area to support your weight. Another misconception I had about fat biking is that you can just ride anywhere. Anywhere there's snow, you can just go and fat bike. But what I've discovered, especially here in Missoula, and I don't think it's really different from other places in the country, that if you fat bike in places where there are skiers, there's going to be some user conflict and they're going to give you the stink eye, or there might be specific rules which disallow fat biking. So for example, we live not too far from this wilderness area, and there is a gravel road. Unbeknownst to me, early in the season, they actually groom that area, and it's a major faux pas to fat bike in groom skiing trails. I didn't know, I've never lived in a place with snow, and that first time I did it, there was no sign instructing me otherwise. So if you're new to fat biking, if you're new to snow, there are rules, some unwritten, some clearly stated. But what I've taken away from this is you can't just willy-nilly assume that you can fat bike in a place because you can physically do it. So that was a bit of an eye-opener at how actually kind of restricted in some ways the fat biking experience can be. Misconception number 3 is that all fat bikes ride the same. I'd sort of assumed that, because they're all using these gigantic tires, the ride feel was going to be generally the same, but I found that this actually isn't the case. That there is quite a wide variation in ride quality between fat bikes. And part of this is material choice, part of this is geometry. So the actual experience of fat biking is actually pretty varied depending on the make and model. And you kind of just have to test ride a bunch of them to see what feels best. And the 4th thing I learned about fat biking in the winter is how wildly inconsistent the surface can be. One day it can be perfect conditions, you get the right amount of float and you're just moving and it's awesome. And the next day it could rain and freeze, and then all of a sudden you're just slipping all over the place on ice and you can barely stand up. So that for me really took me by surprise at how different the conditions can be from one day to the next. Again, this could be different depending on the type of winter you get, but here in Missoula, there's a lot of freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw. So it's actually kind of hard to plan kind of a fat bike ride because you don't know exactly what Mother Nature is going to do. And the 5th thing, which I didn't plan for, is that if you're going to commute year-round on a fat bike and you do live in conditions where there is a freeze and thaw cycle, you're going to have to budget and spend those extra hundreds of dollars to get studded fat bike tires. I know it sounds ridiculous and expensive, and one would think that you'd have a large enough contact patch with a 4.8-inch tire, but that's just not the case. On the days where it's really cold and it's really just a glaze of ice here in Missoula, no matter how low I run the tire pressure or how careful I am, there is always a moment when I feel like I'm gonna slip. So I think if you're gonna use it for a year-round commuter, definitely budget in some studded tires. From what I've heard, at least have them in the front so the front doesn't go out from under you. And if you can afford it, get a pair. Those are the 5 things I've learned from our first winter of fat biking. And I do wanna say, although I listed a lot of, I guess, kind of negative sounding things. I do enjoy fat biking. It's just I had these misconceptions, which I've learned were wrong. And now I can tackle the snowy outside with a fat bike with less disappointment. So that's it for this video. If you have any other questions, leave those in the comments below. I'll try to respond. And as always, if you liked it, like, share, subscribe. Until next video, ride bikes, travel, and do good.